The sound of shattering glass cut through the Saturday night noise of the iron horse like a gunshot. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward the small figure standing frozen in the middle of the bar floor, beer foam spreading across weathered hardwood planks, shards of brown glass glittering under the neon Budweiser sign like scattered diamonds. The jukebox kept playing Toby Keith, but nobody was listening anymore. Hazel Brooks did not move, 5 feet 2 inches, 115 pounds soaking wet. Brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that exposed the slender column of her neck. She wore a faded black t-shirt with the Iron Horse logo stretched across her chest, jeans that had seen better days, and sneakers so old the rubber was peeling away from the canvas. She looked like a college student working her way through community college, or maybe a military spouse picking up extra shifts while her husband deployed overseas. Mason Briggs pushed back from his table with the deliberate slowness of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. 220 pounds of muscle packed onto a 6'3" frame, head shaved clean, jaw like a cinder block. The SEAL candidate patch on his jacket caught the light as he rose, and his smile showed too many teeth. Well, well, well. His voice carried across the bar like a foghorn, designed to be heard, designed to humiliate. Look what we got here, boys. Little girl can't even carry a beer tray without making a mess. Hazel dropped to her knees and began picking up the glass pieces, her movements careful and precise. She did not look up, did not respond. The napkin she pulled from her apron pocket got folded into a perfect triangle before she used it to collect the smaller shards, a detail so small that almost no one noticed. Almost. In the darkest corner of the bar, Commander Caleb Cole set down his whiskey glass. His gray eyes tracked the young woman's movements with an intensity that had nothing to do with the spilled beer. 53 years old, silver threading through his close-cropped hair, the kind of weathered face that came from decades of decisions made in places most Americans would never see on a map. He wore civilian clothes, a simple blue button-down and khakis, but there was no hiding what he was. Some men carried their service in their bones. His hand trembled slightly as he watched Hazel work. A strange reaction for a man who had commanded SEAL team operations for 15 years without flinching. Raven Morrison's laugh cut through the tension like a knife through silk. The intelligence officer sat in the VIP section with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where she ranked in every room she entered. Dark hair perfectly styled, red lipstick that matched her manicured nails, the kind of beauty that came with a price tag most people couldn't afford. "Honey," she called out, not bothering to hide her amusement, "maybe waitressing isn't your calling. Have you considered Starbucks? I hear they have excellent employee training programs." The bar erupted in laughter. Not everyone joined in, but enough did that the sound filled the space like poison gas. Hazel's shoulders hunched slightly, almost imperceptibly, as she continued cleaning up the mess. Grace Wheeler, the bar's owner, stepped out from behind the counter with a frown creasing her weathered face. 62 years old, built like a woman who had spent her life working instead of exercising, with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from running a military bar for 3 decades. "That's enough," she said, her voice carrying quiet authority. "Let the girl do her job." Mason held up his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes never left Hazel. "Just making an observation, Grace. No harm meant." He turned back to his table, where Derek Holloway and 2 other SEAL operators were watching the scene with varying degrees of interest. Seriously, though, that girl probably couldn't carry an M4 if her life depended on it. Connor Walsh, the other bartender on shift, smirked from behind the counter. 26 years old with the kind of face that suggested he had peaked in high school and never quite recovered. He had applied for Hazel's shifts 3 times before she was hired, and the resentment radiated off him like heat from asphalt. "You should see her personnel file," he said, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Completely blank. No military service, no specialized training. Just showed up one day looking for work." Hazel finished cleaning up the glass and rose to her feet. For just a moment, as she straightened, the overhead light caught her left wrist. A scar ran across the skin in a distinctive zigzag pattern, pale against her tan. The kind of mark that told a story if you knew how to read it. Commander Cole nearly knocked over his drink. Because he knew that scar. He knew it from a night in the Hindu Kush Mountains when he had been certain he was going to die, when a small hand had gripped his wrist and pulled him back from the edge of the darkness. But that was impossible. That woman was a ghost, a legend, a name redacted from files so classified that even most flag officers didn't know they existed. And yet here she was, picking up broken glass in a bar outside Joint Base Lewis McChord, letting a SEAL candidate mock her for being weak. Hazel walked back toward the bar with her head down, passing within 3 feet of Cole's table. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him in any way, but as she passed, her right hand made a subtle gesture at her side, fingers forming a shape that most people would dismiss as nervous fidgeting. Cole's breath caught in his throat. It was a signal, an old signal, from a unit that officially didn't exist, using a communication protocol that had never been written down in any training manual. She knew he was here. She had known the whole time. The question was, why was she pretending to be invisible? Before we show you how this tiny waitress is about to flip the script on every single person in this bar, do me a favor. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what happens next? You're going to want to share this with everyone who's ever been underestimated. Drop a comment below telling us where you were watching from, and let's see how far this story reaches. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. The next 20 minutes would answer that question in ways that none of them could have anticipated. But for now, Hazel Brooks was just a clumsy waitress who couldn't carry a beer tray, and that was exactly what she wanted them to believe. Silas Bennett had been drinking at the Iron Horse since before most of these young operators were born. 74 years old, Vietnam veteran, 3 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star, collecting dust in a shadow box he never looked at anymore. He sat at his usual spot at the end of the bar, nursing a Budweiser that had gone warm an hour ago, watching the scene unfold with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by surfaces. Something about the girl bothered him, not in a bad way, in a familiar way. It was the way she stood. Most civilians, especially small women working service jobs, tended to make themselves smaller when confronted by aggressive men. Shoulders hunched, eyes down, body language screaming submission, natural response to perceived threat. But this girl stood different. Her shoulders were back despite her bowed head. Her weight was balanced evenly on both feet, ready to move in any direction. Her hands, even when they trembled slightly, never strayed far from her center of gravity. Silas had seen that stance before, in places where standing wrong could get you killed. He caught Grace's eye and tilted his head slightly toward Hazel. Grace gave him a small shrug that said she had noticed too, but didn't know what to make of it. The door swung open and Lieutenant Commander James Harrison walked in like he owned the place. Probably because, in a certain sense, he did. As the commanding officer of the SEAL Training Detachment at Lewis McChord, Harrison had jurisdiction over every operator in this bar, and he wielded that authority with the easy confidence of a man who had never had to question his own importance. 45 years old, still built like the swimmer he had been at Annapolis, with a handshake that could crush walnuts and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The call sign Hawk was stitched onto his leather jacket, right above the SEAL trident. Mason and his crew immediately straightened up, the mockery dying on their lips as they recognized their superior officer. Harrison acknowledged them with a nod, then scanned the room with the methodical precision of a man conducting threat assessment. His gaze passed over Cole without recognition, which wasn't surprising. Cole had been out of active command for 3 years now, and Harrison had transferred in from the East Coast just 18 months ago. When Harrison's eyes landed on Hazel, something flickered across his face. Not recognition, dismissal. "You," he said, snapping his fingers at her like she was a dog. "Light beer. Make it quick." Hazel nodded once. "Yes, sir." She moved toward the bar with that same quiet efficiency she had demonstrated all night, and Harrison watched her go with the expression of a man who had already forgotten she existed. Ethan Marsh, the off-duty military police officer sitting at the table nearest the door, made a mental note of the interaction. 28 years old, built like a linebacker, with the kind of face that suggested he spent more time observing than talking. He wasn't sure what was happening tonight, but something was off. The tension in the room felt wrong, like the air pressure before a thunderstorm. His hand moved unconsciously toward the service weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Across the room, Noah Carter stepped through the back entrance with the casual confidence of a man who belonged wherever he went. 49 years old, salt and pepper beard, the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from decades of outdoor work. Most people would have taken him for a contractor or maybe a retired firefighter. Most people would have been wrong. Noah's eyes found Cole immediately, and something passed between the two men. Recognition, concern, A conversation conducted entirely in glances that lasted less than 2 seconds. Then Noah's gaze shifted to Hazel, and his expression went completely still. Cole gave an almost imperceptible nod. Noah's jaw tightened, but he found a seat at the bar without drawing attention to himself, positioning himself with clear sightlines to both exits and the main floor. Ivy Patterson watched all of this from her table near the window, 23 years old, fresh out of basic training, still wearing her uniform, because she hadn't had time to change before meeting her friends for drinks. She was one of the only women in the room, besides Hazel and Raven, and the dynamic made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't quite articulate. There was something about the way the men treated the waitress that felt wrong, not just mean, calculated, like they were testing her, probing for weakness, waiting for her to break. And there was something about the way Hazel responded that felt even stranger. The girl wasn't just enduring the abuse, she was absorbing it, cataloging it, filing it away for later use. Ivy had seen that behavior before, in her drill sergeants, in the intelligence officers who briefed her unit before deployments, in people who were playing a very different game than the one everyone else thought they were playing. The TV above the bar was showing a war movie, one of those action films where the explosions were too big and the heroes never ran out of ammunition. A grenade detonated on screen, the sound effect booming through the bar's speaker system. Hazel's reaction was instantaneous and automatic. Her knees bent, her body dropped 6 inches, her left hand came up to cover her head, while her right hand reached for something that wasn't there. The movement lasted less than a second. She caught herself almost immediately, straightening up with a slightly embarrassed laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mason saw the whole thing. Holy cow! He slapped his table so hard that the glasses rattled. Did you see that? Little girl thought she was in a combat zone. He cupped his hands around his mouth. Hey, sweetheart. The bad guys are on TV. They can't hurt you. More laughter, louder this time. Derek Holloway was practically crying, wiping tears from his eyes as he watched Hazel's face flush with what looked like shame. But Commander Cole wasn't laughing. Neither was Noah Carter, because that reaction hadn't been the startled response of a nervous civilian. It had been textbook combat conditioning. Muscle memory burned into the nervous system through thousands of hours of training and reinforced by actual experience under fire. Regular people didn't move like that. Not even most soldiers moved like that. Only operators moved like that. The kind of operators who had been in enough real firefights that their bodies responded before their conscious minds even registered the threat. Amber Liu, the other bartender, touched Hazel's shoulder gently as she passed. You okay, hun? Hazel nodded, her expression neutral. Fine, just startled, but her eyes told a different story. For just a moment, before she got them back under control, those eyes had gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere dark and cold, and very, very far from Washington State. Cole had seen eyes like that before, in the mirror, every morning for 3 years after Operation Fallen Eagle. Speaking of precision under pressure, let me tell you about something the operators in this story would appreciate. There's a new generation of tactical smartwatches hitting the market. Military-grade durability, real-time health monitoring, GPS tracking that works even in the most remote mountain terrain. The kind of technology that could mean the difference between life and death on a mission. Some of our viewers have been asking about these. Check the description for more details. The night wore on, and the harassment continued in waves. Connor Walsh accidentally knocked a full tray of drinks out of Hazel's hands, forcing her to clean up another mess while Mason's table provided commentary. Raven Morrison called her over to the VIP section 3 separate times, each time to complain about something trivial. The ice ratio in her vodka tonic, the temperature of the room, the way Hazel was breathing too loudly near her table. Through it all, Hazel remained silent, patient, her face a mask of professional neutrality that gave nothing away. But the breadcrumbs kept falling. When Derek Holloway asked her what kind of hops went into the IPA on tap, she answered without hesitation. Cascade and Centennial, dry hopped for 14 days with a secondary addition of Simcoe for citrus notes. The level of detail surprised him enough that he forgot to make fun of her. When she picked up empty bottles from Mason's table, she held them by the neck, 3 at a time, with her fingers positioned exactly the way a soldier would grip the handguard of an M4 carbine. When Benjamin Stone, the local sheriff, walked in for his usual Saturday night bourbon, Hazel acknowledged him with a nod that was almost, but not quite, a military greeting. And when she thought no one was looking, she would scan the room with a systematic pattern that covered every exit, every potential threat, every tactical position in the space. It took her exactly 4 seconds to complete each sweep. She did it every 3 minutes, like clockwork. Logan Pierce noticed. The young SEAL operator had been watching her all night, trying to figure out what was bothering him about the waitress. He had graduated buds 8 months ago, still fresh enough to be impressed by everything and cynical enough to question it. Something about this girl didn't add up. He pulled out his phone and typed "Mountain Ghost Unit" into the search bar, not sure why that phrase had popped into his head. The results were useless. Conspiracy theories, fan fiction, nothing official. But the phrase kept nagging at him, like a song he couldn't quite remember. At 11:45, Mason decided he was tired of subtle harassment. He stood up from his table, swaying slightly from the 6 beers he had consumed, and positioned himself directly in Hazel's path. 220 pounds of drunk muscle blocking a 115-pound waitress, like a dam holding back a stream. "Hold up," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "I want to see something." Hazel stopped. Her expression remained neutral, but there was a new tension in her shoulders, coiled like a spring. "Sir, I need to get these drinks to table 7. They can wait." Mason reached out and grabbed her left hand before she could react, turning it palm up to examine it under the light. His expression shifted from drunk amusement to genuine confusion. "What the?" He ran his thumb across her palm, feeling the calluses there. "These aren't waitress hands. These are..." He trailed off, not quite able to articulate what he was seeing. Hazel pulled her hand back with more force than seemed possible from someone her size. "Excuse me, sir." "No, wait." Mason's confusion was morphing into something else. Suspicion, hostility. "Connor said your resume was empty. No work history, no references. You just showed up one day asking for shifts." He leaned closer, invading her personal space. "So, who are you really?" The bar had gone quiet. Every eye in the place was on them now. Hazel met his gaze for the first time all night. Her eyes were brown, unremarkable, the kind of eyes that would disappear in a crowd. But there was something in them now that made Mason take an involuntary step back. "I'm just a waitress," she said quietly. "Nothing more. People who are nothing more don't have hands like that." Mason's voice had lost some of its bravado. "People who are nothing more don't react to loud noises like they're expecting incoming fire." Raven Morrison had risen from her seat, drawn by the confrontation. "And Mason, what's going on?" "I don't know." He was staring at Hazel like he was seeing her for the first time. "But I'm going to find out." "Okay, things are starting to get interesting. If you're picking up on all these clues about who Hazel really is, you're paying attention. Hit that like button right now and let's keep this story moving. The next few minutes are going to change everything." Lieutenant Commander Harrison pushed back from his table, annoyed by the disruption to his Saturday night. "Briggs, what exactly do you think you're doing? Sir, something's off about this girl. She's not what she seems." Harrison looked at Hazel with the expression of a man being forced to consider an insect. "She seems like a waitress who's having a difficult night. Stand down, candidate." "But, sir..." "I said stand down." The command in Harrison's voice was absolute. Mason stepped back, but his eyes never left Hazel. Whatever he had seen in her hands, whatever he had felt in the strength of her grip when she pulled away, it had planted a seed of doubt that wouldn't go away. Derek Holloway saw an opportunity. The technical challenger had been watching the exchange with growing interest, his tactical mind working through possibilities. "Hey, Mason, let it go." He rose from his seat with a casual smile that didn't match his calculating eyes. "She's obviously just some army wife trying to make ends meet while her husband's deployed. Probably learned a few things from him." He turned to Hazel, his tone condescending. "That's it, right? Husband's military? Maybe taught you how to field strip a weapon for fun?" Hazel said nothing. Silas Bennett spoke up from the end of the bar. "Leave the girl alone. What's wrong with you people? Stay out of this, Grandpa." Mason's frustration was looking for a new target. "This doesn't concern you, boy. I was fighting in jungles while your daddy was still in diapers." Silas's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had nothing left to prove. "And I'm telling you, you're making a fool of yourself." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Connor Walsh was practically bouncing behind the bar, thrilled by the drama. Grace Wheeler's hand moved toward the phone, ready to call the MPs if things got out of control. Ivy Patterson found herself holding her breath. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Noah Carter's hand had moved beneath the bar, finding the grip of the personal weapon he should not have been carrying in this establishment. His eyes met Cole's across the room. Ready. Cole gave a slight shake of his head. Not yet. Derek Holloway pulled something from his jacket pocket, an M9 service pistol, unloaded, the slide locked back to show the empty chamber. He set it on the table with a clatter that made several people jump. Here's a thought, he said, his smile widening. If you're really just some clueless waitress, you won't know what to do with this. But if you're something else, he gestured toward the weapon. Prove Mason wrong. Show us you don't know how to field strip a Beretta. Hazel stared at the weapon. Her expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her stance. I'm not touching that. Why not? It's empty, completely safe. Derek leaned back in his chair. Unless you're afraid you'll show us something you'd rather keep hidden. Holloway, that's enough. Harrison's voice carried a warning note, but he made no move to stop the confrontation. Connor Walsh appeared at Hazel's elbow, unable to resist twisting the knife. Come on, Hazel. Either you know what you're doing and you've been lying to everyone, or you don't, and you can prove these guys wrong. What's the problem? The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If Hazel refused, she looked suspicious. If she tried and failed, she proved she was just what she appeared to be. If she succeeded, she revealed herself as something other than a simple waitress. There was no good option, which was exactly the point. Silas Bennett started to rise from his seat, ready to intervene, but Hazel held up a hand to stop him. Fine, she said quietly. She reached for the M9. The moment her fingers touched the weapon, everything changed. The clumsy waitress who couldn't carry a beer tray without dropping it disappeared. In her place stood someone else entirely. Hazel's hands moved with fluid precision, each motion economical and exact. Magazine release, slide lock, barrel bushing, recoil spring. The components separated from each other like they were eager to be apart, guided by fingers that knew this dance intimately. 12 seconds. That's how long it took her to completely field strip the weapon. The room had gone silent. Even the jukebox seemed to be holding its breath. Then, without pausing, without looking up, without any expression crossing her face, Hazel reversed the process. The components flowed back together with the same surgical precision, each piece finding its home with a satisfying click. 14 seconds for the reassembly, 26 seconds total, less than half the time it would take most trained operators. Harrison was on his feet. He hadn't consciously decided to stand. His body had simply reacted to what his mind refused to process. Mason's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Nobody moves that fast. Derek Holloway was staring at the reassembled weapon like it had personally betrayed him. Where did you learn to do that? Hazel set the M9 back on the table. Her expression was completely neutral, revealing nothing. I've seen it done before. You didn't see that. You trained that. Harrison's voice had lost its dismissive edge. That's muscle memory. That's thousands of hours of practice. The room erupted in chaos. Everyone was talking at once, questions overlapping, theories being thrown around. Connor Walsh looked like he was going to be sick. Mason was backing away from Hazel, like she had suddenly transformed into something dangerous, which, in a sense, she had. Commander Cole set down his whiskey and began to rise from his seat. The movement was slow, deliberate, the action of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen and was preparing himself for it. Noah Carter's hand came up from beneath the bar, empty now, and he found himself smiling despite the tension. He had heard the stories about Little Bear for years. He had never quite believed them. He believed them now. Now, here's something every veteran should know about. There are specialized insurance programs designed specifically for military families and first responders. Coverage that understands the unique risks of service. Life insurance, disability protection, benefits that actually make sense for people who put their lives on the line. If you're serving or you've served, you owe it to your family to look into this. Links in the description below. We're about to reach the moment you've been waiting for. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. What happens in the next 60 seconds? Nobody in that bar saw it coming. Neither will you. Derek Holloway wasn't satisfied. The technical challenger had built his entire identity around being the smartest operator in any room, and what he had just witnessed threatened that foundation. One weapon proves nothing, he said, reaching into his bag and pulling out an M4 carbine, also unloaded, also cleared for safety. He set it on the table next to the M9. Anyone can learn to work a pistol. Let's see what you do with a rifle. Harrison opened his mouth to object, but something stopped him. Curiosity, maybe. or the dawning realization that he was watching something unprecedented. Hazel looked at the M4, looked at Derek, looked at the crowd of faces surrounding her, some hostile, some confused, some beginning to suspect what others already knew. She picked up the rifle, and then she did something that would be talked about in military circles for years. She field-stripped the M4 with one hand, her left hand, with her eyes closed. The components came apart in sequence, guided by touch alone, arranged on the table in a precise pattern that allowed for rapid reassembly. Bolt carrier group, charging handle, buffer tube components, each piece handled with the casual familiarity of a concert pianist running through scales. 18 seconds. Then she put it back together, still one-handed, still blind, still with that same impossible economy of motion that made it look like the weapon was assembling itself. 22 seconds. 40 seconds total. She opened her eyes and set the rifle down. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the TV had chosen that moment to cut to commercial. Even the wind outside seemed to be holding its breath. Harrison's hands were shaking. He had spent 25 years in naval special warfare. He had trained with the best operators in the world. He had never, in his entire career, seen anyone handle a weapon like that. "Who are you?" The question came out as a whisper. Hazel didn't answer. Mason Briggs couldn't take it anymore. The fear and confusion that had been building in him all night finally boiled over into action. He grabbed Hazel's shoulder and spun her around to face him. "I said, who are you?" His voice cracked. "Nobody moves like that. Nobody!" He grabbed at her shirt, trying to intimidate, trying to reassert the dominance he had felt slipping away all night. His grip was too strong. The fabric was too old. The left shoulder of Hazel's black t-shirt tore away, exposing the skin beneath, and everything stopped. There, on her left shoulder blade, was a tattoo, a stylized mountain peak, rendered in black ink with geometric precision. Below it, a single phrase in military block letters, "Mountain Ghost." And below that, a string of coordinates, 36 degrees 42 minutes north, 71 degrees 18 minutes east. Mason released her like he had been burned. His eyes were wide, his face the color of old paper. That's not... Commander Caleb Cole stepped forward from the shadows. His movements were precise, deliberate, carrying the weight of ceremony. He stopped 3 feet from Hazel and came to attention, his heels clicking together, his back ramrod straight. Then he raised his right hand to his brow in a perfect military salute. "Staff Sergeant Brooks." His voice carried across the silent bar like a funeral bell. "Operation Fallen Eagle, August 12th, 2009. Hazel turned to face him. For a long moment, she simply looked at the man she had carried 8 miles through the Hindu Kush Mountains 16 years ago. The man she had dragged through snow and ice and enemy fire when everyone else said to leave him behind. Then, slowly, she returned his salute. "Commander Cole, good to see you're still vertical." The bar exploded, not with sound, but with reaction. Every person in that room was processing the same impossible information, and their bodies responded before their minds could catch up. Silas Bennett was on his feet, tears streaming down his weathered face, his own hand raised in the salute of a different era. Ivy Patterson had knocked over her chair, her mouth hanging open, her phone already recording. Logan Pierce was furiously typing on his phone, finally understanding why the phrase "mountain ghost" had been nagging at him all night. Raven Morrison had dropped her cocktail glass for the second time that evening, red lipstick garish against skin gone pale with shock. But it was Mason Briggs who provided the most dramatic reaction. The SEAL candidate who had spent all night mocking the small waitress stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, nearly falling. His face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Disbelief, denial, fear, shame, more fear. "Mountain Ghost," he whispered. "Mountain Ghost Unit. They're not real. They're a legend. A ghost story instructors tell to scare candidates." Harrison found his voice. It came out strangled, nothing like the commanding tone he had used all night. "They're real. One of the most classified units in the entire military. Search and rescue specialists for impossible terrain. Personnel so elite that even DevGru doesn't know the full roster." He stared at Hazel like she had materialized out of thin air. I heard rumors that the unit was disbanded after August 2009, Cole finished for him. After Operation Fallen Eagle, after half the team didn't come home. His eyes never left Hazel's face. After this woman carried me 8 miles through the Hindu Kush with 2 rounds in my leg and Taliban fighters on our heels. 220 pounds of dead weight, plus her own gear. Through mountain passes that would kill most people just to walk through unencumbered. The room was processing this information in waves of shock. Noah Carter had stepped out from his position at the bar, moving to stand beside Cole. "I was there too," he said quietly. "I was one of the 3 others she saved that night. We were pinned down, out of ammunition, surrounded. Command had written us off as KIA. They were already composing letters to our families." He looked at Hazel with an expression that mixed reverence with something deeper. And then this woman came out of nowhere, 115 ponas of pure determination. She eliminated the enemy position with a single M4 and 2 magazines, then carried Caleb down the mountain while the rest of us provided what cover we could. His voice cracked. She didn't stop for 8 hours, didn't rest, didn't complain, just kept putting one foot in front of the other until she reached the extraction point. Mason Briggs was making sounds, but they weren't quite words. The cognitive dissonance between the clumsy waitress he had mocked all night and the legendary operator standing before him was too much for his brain to process. Derek Holloway was staring at the weapons on the table, the ones Hazel had field-stripped with such impossible skill. The stories say mountain ghost operators could assemble weapons blindfolded, in any conditions, with any injury. I thought it was exaggeration. "Everything you've heard is probably an understatement," Cole said. "And Staff Sergeant Brooks was the best of them. Her call sign was Little Bear, because she was small and because you should never, ever underestimate a bear." Harrison finally managed to form a complete sentence. "Why? Why are you here? Why pretend to be a waitress?" Hazel's voice was quiet, controlled, revealing nothing. "Because sometimes the best way to observe is to be invisible. People say things around the help that they'd never say to an equal." The implications of that statement rippled through the room. How many conversations had been held within earshot of the clumsy waitress? How much classified information had been discussed around someone they assumed was too insignificant to matter? Connor Walsh looked like he was going to throw up. Every petty comment, every sabotage drink order, every snide remark about her empty resume, she had heard all of it. She had filed it away, analyzed it, probably included it in whatever report she would eventually submit. Grace Wheeler was the first civilian to speak. "Hazel, sweetheart, you've been working here for 3 weeks. You've never said anything." "I wasn't here to talk, Grace." Hazel's expression softened slightly when she looked at the older woman. "I was here to watch and wait." "Wait for what?" Before Hazel could answer, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and something flickered across her face. Not surprise, recognition. "That," she said quietly. She looked around the room, her gaze settling briefly on each person present. The antagonists who had spent all night trying to break her. The allies who had known the truth from the beginning. The bystanders who were still struggling to reconcile what they thought if they knew with what they had just witnessed. Then her eyes found someone in the corner of the room. A man who had been sitting there all night, drinking alone, saying nothing, reacting to nothing. Not even the revelation of her identity had provoked a visible response. He was watching her now with an expression that sent a chill down Commander Cole's spine, a knowing smile. "Excuse me," Hazel said, and her voice had changed again. Gone was the quiet deference of the waitress. In its place was something harder, colder, more focused. "I have work to do." She began moving toward the exit, her stride transformed from the shuffle of a service worker to the purposeful gait of an operator on mission. Mason Briggs stepped into her path, not with aggression this time, but with something that looked almost like desperation. "Wait, please, I need to..." He couldn't find the words. Hazel stopped. She looked up at the man who had spent all night trying to humiliate her, really looked at him, and for a moment, the mask slipped. "You want to know why I didn't fight back earlier? Why I let you mock me, push me, treat me like I was nothing?" Mason nodded, mute. "Because real strength isn't about proving yourself to every person who underestimates you. It's about knowing who you are, regardless of what anyone else thinks." She paused. "And because the person I was watching all night, they needed to believe I was harmless. They needed to think I was exactly what you thought I was." She glanced toward the corner where the smiling man had been sitting. The table was empty. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a mission to complete." She walked out into the night, leaving behind a bar full of people whose understanding of the world had just been fundamentally reorganized. Commander Cole was already reaching for his phone. "I need to make some calls." Harrison grabbed his arm. "Wait. What just happened? What mission? Who was she watching?" Cole's face was grim. "I don't know, but I recognized that look in her eyes. The last time I saw it was right before she walked into that enemy position with nothing but an M4 and a prayer." Noah Carter was already moving toward the door. "I'm going with her." "No." Cole's voice was sharp. "If she wanted backup, she would have asked for it. Little Bear works alone. She always has." Outside, the Washington night had turned cold. Hazel Brooks stood in the parking lot, her torn shirt exposing the tattoo that had changed everything, her eyes tracking a black sedan that was pulling out of the lot. Her phone buzzed again. New coordinates, new instructions. She had been watching Connor Walsh all night, not because he was sabotaging her drink orders, but because he had been passing information to someone outside the bar, someone who had been tracking military movements through the base, someone who had finally shown themselves when they realized their cover might be blown. The mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. She pulled a jacket from the back of her pickup truck, covering the evidence of her identity, transforming once again into someone forgettable. But as she climbed into the driver's seat, she allowed herself one small smile. It had been a long time since she had felt this alive. Before we wrap up, something important for anyone thinking about their future. There are online certification programs now offering tactical training, emergency response courses, even degrees in military science, all from accredited institutions. Whether you're active duty looking to advance or a veteran transitioning to civilian life, education is the key. Several viewers have found great opportunities through these programs. Details in the description. That reveal just changed everything. But here's the thing. Hazel's story doesn't end here. If you want to see what happens when she takes on her next mission, click the video on screen right now. Trust me, it's even more intense. Back inside the Iron Horse, the aftermath was still unfolding. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had taken command of the situation, such as it was. He was on the phone with base security, trying to explain what had just happened without sounding like he had lost his mind. "Yes, I'm aware of how this sounds. No, I have not been drinking. Well, yes, I have been drinking, but that's not... Look, just get me Commander Mitchell on a secure line. This is above my pay grade." Mason Briggs had collapsed into a chair, staring at nothing. The SEAL candidate who had spent all night projecting dominance and aggression looked like a man who had just watched his entire worldview crumble. Raven Morrison was gone. She had slipped out during the chaos, unable to face the implications of her behavior towards someone who had turned out to be a genuine hero. Derek Holloway was still examining the M4 on the table, running his hands over the components, trying to understand how anyone could handle a weapon with such supernatural precision. Connor Walsh had been detained by Ethan Marsh. The off-duty MP had noticed the bartender trying to sneak out the back door and had used his training to intercept him. "I didn't do anything," Connor was protesting. "I just passed along some information. I didn't know it was classified. I didn't know she was..." "Save it for the debrief," Marsh said flatly. Silas Bennett had resumed his position at the bar, a fresh beer in his hand, a distant look in his eyes. He had seen a lot of things in his 74 years. Wars, protests, the fall of empires and the rise of new ones. But he had never seen anything quite like what had happened tonight. "Mountain Ghost," he murmured to himself. "Well, I'll be." Grace Wheeler was trying to restore some semblance of normalcy to her establishment, but it was a losing battle. Half her customers were on their phones, trying to research a unit that had no official existence. The other half were still staring at the door through which Hazel had disappeared, as if expecting her to walk back in and reveal it had all been an elaborate joke. Ivy Patterson had claimed a seat at the table where Cole and Noah were having a quiet conversation. The young soldier's eyes were bright with something that looked like inspiration. "Is it true?" she asked. "Everything you said about her?" Cole nodded slowly. "Every word. And there's more. Things I can't talk about even now. Missions so classified that the people who authorize them don't officially exist. She saved your life. She saved a lot of lives. Most of them never knew it was her." Cole's voice dropped. "That's what she does. That's what Mountain Ghost did. They went into places where no one else could go, accomplished objectives that no one else could accomplish, and then they disappeared. No medals, no recognition, just shadows in the night and enemy positions that suddenly went silent." Ivy leaned forward. How do I become like her? Cole studied the young woman for a long moment. You don't. Nobody becomes like Hazel Brooks. She's one of a kind. He paused. But if you're asking how to become the best version of yourself, start by never underestimating anyone, including yourself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metal, a challenge coin, weathered by years of handling, bearing the insignia of SEAL Team. He pressed it into Ivy's palm. Consider that your first lesson. Ivy stared at the coin, her fingers closing around it like it was a sacred relic. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Thank her. Cole nodded toward the door. Wherever she's going tonight, whatever she's doing, remember that people like Hazel Brooks are the reason people like us can sleep at night. He paused. And remember that the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one nobody notices. Outside, the night continued. Somewhere in the darkness, Hazel Brooks was hunting. And somewhere else, someone was about to learn the same lesson that Mason Briggs and all the others had learned tonight. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They tend to be the ones who change everything. The clock on the wall of the Iron Horse showed 12:17 a.m. when Commander Cole finally stood to leave. The bar had mostly emptied out, the drama of the evening having driven away all but the most dedicated drinkers. Harrison caught his arm as he headed for the door. Cole, wait. Lieutenant Commander? That woman, Hazel, Staff Sergeant Brooks. Harrison's voice was still shaky. The coordinates on her tattoo, 36 degrees 42 minutes north, 71 degrees 18 minutes east. That's the Hindu Kush. Specifically, a mountain pass that officially doesn't have a name, in a region where officially no American forces ever operated. Cole's expression was unreadable. That's where Operation Fallen Eagle took place. That's where 7 members of Mountain Ghost Unit went in, and only 4 came out. And she carries those coordinates on her body, forever. She carries a lot more than that. Cole pulled his arm free gently. The mountains aren't just where she fought, Harrison. They're where part of her stayed. The part that could live a normal life. The part that could walk into a bar and not calculate every sight line and exit route. The part that could look at a stranger and not immediately assess them as a threat. He moved toward the door, then paused. You asked why she was pretending to be a waitress. I'll tell you why. Because people like Hazel don't know how to stop being warriors. The mission ended, but she didn't. So she found a new mission, a new enemy, a new reason to wake up in the morning. He shook his head slowly. That's the price of what she is. She bought our lives with her soul, and she's still paying the interest. Harrison had no response to that. Cole stepped out into the night, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving the Iron Horse to its ghosts and its memories. Grace Wheeler surveyed the damage. Broken glasses, overturned chairs, a career-ending revelation for at least one of her employees. Well, she said to no one in particular, that's definitely the most interesting Saturday night we've had in a while. Silas Bennett raised his beer in silent agreement. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a car engine faded into nothing, carrying Little Bear toward whatever darkness awaited her. The night was far from over, and Hazel Brooks was just getting started. The black sedan maintained a steady speed through the empty streets of Lakewood, its taillights glowing like predator eyes in the darkness. Hazel kept 3 car lengths back, her headlights off, navigating by moonlight and muscle memory through roads she had memorized during her first week at the Iron Horse. The driver thought he was being careful. He had waited until the chaos of her revelation to slip out, using the crowd's shock as cover. He had walked to his car without rushing, started the engine without revving, pulled out of the lot without squealing tires. Amateur moves dressed up as professional tradecraft. Hazel had spotted him on her second day at the bar. Something about the way he sat, always in the same corner, always facing the door, always nursing drinks he never finished. He came in at irregular intervals designed to seem random, but patterns emerged if you watched long enough. He was present whenever certain SEAL team members visited. He left within 15 minutes of their departure. And he always made a phone call from his car before driving away. Connor Walsh had been the connection. The bitter bartender had been passing information for months, small details that seemed harmless in isolation, but formed a devastating picture when assembled. Training schedules, deployment rumors, personal information about operators and their families. The kind of intelligence that got people killed. Hazel had needed 3 weeks to map the network. Connor was the collector, too stupid to understand what he was doing, motivated by nothing more than petty cash and the thrill of feeling important. The man in the sedan was the handler, professional enough to maintain distance but arrogant enough to show his face in public. There would be others. There were always others. The sedan turned onto Military Road, heading toward the base perimeter. Hazel followed, her mind running through scenarios. The smart play would be to call this in, let the proper authorities handle the apprehension. She had enough evidence for an arrest, enough documentation for a conviction. But proper authorities meant proper procedures, and proper procedures meant the network would have time to scatter. The handler would disappear. The higher connections would burn their trails. And in 6 months, a new network would emerge, run by the same people, targeting new sources. Hazel had seen it happen before, too many times. Her phone buzzed, a text from a blocked number. Authorization confirmed, proceed at discretion. She allowed herself a thin smile. Some calls went through channels that didn't officially exist, to people whose job titles would never appear on any organizational chart. The sedan pulled into a rest stop 3 miles from the base gate. Empty at this hour, just a single sodium light casting orange shadows across cracked asphalt. The handler stepped out of his car, phone pressed to his ear, pacing with the nervous energy of a man who knew something had gone wrong, but didn't yet understand how badly. Hazel parked 50 yards away and killed her engine. She sat in the darkness for a moment, centering herself, feeling the familiar calm settle over her mind like a blanket of fresh snow. This was what she was made for. This was who she was. She stepped out of her truck and began walking toward the man, her footsteps silent on the pavement. The torn shirt exposed her tattoo, but she didn't bother covering it now. Let him see. Let him understand what was coming for him. He spotted her when she was 20 feet away. His phone call cut off mid-sentence, his hand dropping to his side where a weapon would be if he was smart enough to carry one. He wasn't. "You're her," he said, and there was something almost like wonder in his voice. The waitress, mountain ghost. Hazel stopped 10 feet from him, her hands loose at her sides, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet. "I'm going to give you one chance," she said quietly. "Names, contacts, the complete network. Everything you know, everything you suspect, everything you've ever heard whispered in dark rooms." The handler laughed. It was a nervous sound, high and tight. "You think I'm afraid of you? You're one woman, one small woman against an organization that spans 3 continents. I'm not just one woman." Hazel's voice didn't change. "I'm the woman who walked into a Taliban stronghold with 17 rounds and walked out with 4 rescued hostages. I'm the woman who spent 6 months in a country you've never heard of, dismantling a network that made yours look like children playing spy games. I'm the woman that intelligence agencies on 4 continents have tried to identify, locate, and eliminate for the past 15 years. She took one step forward. And I'm the woman who is very, very tired of people like you getting good soldiers killed." The handler's bravado crumbled. She could see it happening, the collapse of his carefully constructed confidence as the reality of his situation became clear. He was alone, unarmed, facing someone who had been bred for exactly this moment. "I want immunity," he said, his voice cracking. "Protection, a new identity. You'll get what I decide you deserve. That depends entirely on what you tell me in the next 5 minutes." He told her everything. Names spilled out of him like water from a broken dam. Contacts in 3 countries. Payment routes through cryptocurrency exchanges. A list of compromised personnel that made her blood run cold. The network was bigger than she had suspected, more sophisticated, more deeply embedded in military infrastructure. Hazel recorded every word on a device that would upload automatically to servers she had never seen, operated by people she would never meet. When he finished, she pulled out a phone, not her personal one, and dialed a number from memory. "Package ready for pickup. Rest stop on Military Road, 3 miles from Lewis McCord, main gate. He's cooperative but will need persuasion to stay that way." She ended the call without waiting for a response. The handler stared at her. "What happens now?" "Now you wait. Some people are coming to collect you. They'll ask you the same questions I did, and you'll give them the same answers." She paused. "If you're smart, you'll tell them things you didn't tell me. Things you held back because you thought that they might be useful leverage later." His face went pale. "How did you—" "Because everyone holds something back. It's human nature." She turned to walk away, then stopped. "One more thing. The soldiers whose information you sold. Some of them had families, children. People who will never know why their father or mother didn't come home. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I want you to think about that every day for the rest of your life, whatever that life looks like. She walked back to her truck without looking back. Headlights appeared on the horizon, moving fast, the extraction team arriving with the efficiency that came from long practice. By the time they reached the rest stop, Hazel was already gone, her taillights disappearing into the night. The mission was complete, but the night was far from over. Back at the Iron Horse, the aftermath continued to unfold in waves. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had finally gotten Commander Mitchell on the phone, and the conversation was not going well. Mitchell was the base security chief, a man who had spent 30 years in military intelligence and thought he had seen everything. The story Harrison was telling him suggested otherwise. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Mitchell's voice crackled through the phone. You're telling me that a classified operative from a unit that officially doesn't exist has been working as a waitress in a bar outside my base for 3 weeks and nobody noticed? That's correct, sir. And during that time, she identified a security breach that my entire department missed? Harrison winced. Also correct, sir. A long pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let anyone leave. The line went dead. Harrison looked around the bar at the remaining occupants. Most of the casual drinkers had fled, unwilling to be associated with whatever was about to happen. What remained was a core group of people whose lives had been permanently altered by the events of the evening. Mason Briggs sat alone at a table, staring at his hands. The confident SEAL candidate who had walked into the Iron Horse 6 hours ago no longer existed. In his place was a man confronting the uncomfortable reality that his entire worldview had been built on assumptions that were fundamentally wrong. Derek Holloway had given up examining the weapons and was now engaged in a quiet conversation with Logan Pierce. Both men were trying to process what they had witnessed, comparing notes, attempting to construct a narrative that made sense. Silas Bennett had ordered his 4th beer and was telling stories to anyone who would listen. Stories about women he had served with in Vietnam, women who had been nurses and clerks on paper, but had done things that never made it into official records. His voice carried the particular reverence of a man who understood exactly what Hazel Brooks represented. There was this one nurse, he was saying, small thing, couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, worked at the field hospital near Da Nang. Officially, she just treated wounded soldiers. Unofficially, he shook his head. Let's just say the Viet Cong learned not to attack that hospital, never found out why, never asked. Ivy Patterson hung on every word, the challenge coin clutched in her hand like a talisman. Grace Wheeler had closed the bar to new customers and was methodically cleaning up the mess. Glass swept into bins, tables righted, chairs arranged. The physical restoration of order that contrasted sharply with the psychological chaos still reverberating through the room. When she reached the table where Hazel had performed her impossible feat of weapon handling, Grace paused. The M4 and M9 were still there, components gleaming under the bar lights. She stared at them for a long moment. 3 weeks, she murmured. 3 weeks she worked here, and I never suspected a thing. That's the point, Noah Carter said from his seat at the bar. If you had suspected, she wouldn't have been doing her job right. Grace looked at him. Did you know, from the beginning? I knew when I walked in tonight. Caleb called me, said something was happening, asked me to provide backup if needed. Noah's expression was unreadable. But I never suspected before that. Never even considered that the quiet waitress might be one of the most decorated operators in the history of special operations. Decorated? Derek Holloway looked up from his conversation. What do you mean, decorated? Noah hesitated. I probably shouldn't. The cat's out of the bag, Commander Cole said, stepping back into the bar. He had been outside making calls for the past 20 minutes, coordinating with people whose names would never appear in any phone directory. Might as well give them the full picture. He walked to the center of the room, his presence commanding attention without effort. Staff Sergeant Hazel Brooks has been awarded 3 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Distinguished Service Cross, all classified, all redacted from official records. Her personnel file, the real one, is stored in a facility that most generals don't have clearance to enter. The room was silent. During her active service with Mountain Ghost Unit, she participated in 37 operations across 14 countries. 23 of those operations are still classified at the highest level. The other 14 have been partially declassified, but her involvement has been scrubbed from all reports. Cole paused. She's saved more lives than anyone in this room will ever know, and she'll never receive public recognition for any of it. Mason Briggs looked like he was going to be sick. And I spent all night calling her, mocking her. Yes, Cole said simply. You did. Why didn't she say something? Why didn't she put me in my place? Because that's not who she is. Hazel Brooks doesn't need validation from people like you. She knows exactly what she's worth. And that worth isn't measured in the opinions of SEAL candidates who confuse volume for strength. The words landed like hammer blows. Mason flinched with each one. Cole's expression softened slightly. But here's the thing, Briggs. You're young, you're stupid, you're full of testosterone and ego and all the things that make 22-year-old men insufferable. That's not a permanent condition. You can choose to learn from tonight, or you can choose to double down on your worst instincts. He paused. The choice is yours. But I'll tell you this, if you become half the operator that Hazel Brooks is, you'll be better than 99% of the people who ever wear a trident. Mason swallowed hard. How? How do I even begin to? Start by apologizing, not to her, she's gone and she doesn't care anyway, but to yourself. Acknowledge that you were wrong. Sit with that discomfort. Let it change you. Cole's voice dropped. That's what separates good operators from great ones. Good operators never admit weakness. Great operators recognize it, own it, and use it to become stronger. The door opened, and Commander Mitchell walked in, flanked by 2 military police officers. 58 years old, built like a defensive lineman gone slightly to seed, with the kind of face that suggested he had personally interrogated every suspicious person within a 100-mile radius. His eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, assessing threats, filing away details for later analysis. When his gaze landed on Cole, something flickered across his expression. Caleb, should have known you'd be involved in this circus. Good to see you too, Frank. Mitchell gestured to his MPs, who immediately moved to secure Connor Walsh. The disgraced bartender had been sitting in a corner, guarded by Ethan Marsh, his face the color of old concrete. That one's ours, Mitchell said. He's been on our radar for a while, but we could never pin down what he was doing. Thanks to your mysterious waitress, we now have enough evidence to put him away for a very long time. She's not my waitress, Cole said. She's not anyone's anything. Hazel Brooks belongs to herself. Mitchell grunted. That's what worries me. Operators like her, the ones who can't be controlled, can't be predicted, they make people nervous. Important people. Important people should be nervous. It keeps them honest. Harrison stepped forward. Commander Mitchell, sir, I need to understand what happened here tonight. I have men under my command who were present for whatever this was. They're going to have questions. I need answers. Mitchell studied him for a long moment. Lieutenant Commander Harrison, what I'm about to tell you is classified at a level that will make your clearance look like a library card. If you repeat any of it outside this room, you will spend the rest of your military career counting penguins in Antarctica. Understood? Understood, sir. Good. Mitchell pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, the weight of the evening pressing on his shoulders. Mountain Ghost Unit was established in 2003 as a Joint Services Special Operations Unit, specializing in personnel recovery in extreme terrain, mountains, jungles, Arctic environments, places where conventional rescue operations were impossible. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The selection process was brutal. 98% washout rate, higher than any other special operations pipeline in the military. The training was worse. Candidates had to demonstrate not just physical capability, but psychological resilience beyond anything we had ever tested for. Derek Holloway leaned forward. Why have I never heard of them? I've been in special operations for 12 years. Because they were ghosts. That's not just a name, it's a description. Mountain Ghost operators didn't exist on paper. They had no official assignments, no permanent duty stations, no records that couldn't be erased at a moment's notice. When they deployed, they went in clean, no identification, no connection to the United States military. If they were captured, they were on their own. The implications of that statement settled over the room like a funeral shroud. Hazel Brooks was recruited in 2005, Mitchell continued. She was 22 years old, already exceptional, a standout in Army Ranger training, who had caught the attention of people who were always watching for unusual talent. She passed Mountain Ghost selection on her first attempt, one of only 3 candidates out of 217 who made it through that cycle. And Operation Fallen Eagle? Cole asked quietly. Mitchell's expression darkened. August 2009. 7 Mountain Ghost operators deployed to the Hindu Kush to extract a high-value target from a compound deep in Taliban territory. The mission was compromised from the start. Someone leaked the operational details, though we never determined who. The team walked into an ambush. His voice dropped. 3 operators were killed in the initial contact. The remaining 4, including Commander Cole here and Staff Sergeant Brooks, were pinned down in a mountain pass with no extraction possible. They were out of ammunition, out of options, written off as killed in action by command. Silas Bennett had stopped drinking. His eyes were fixed on Mitchell with the intensity of a man reliving his own forgotten battles. What happened next is the stuff of legend, Mitchell said. Staff Sergeant Brooks, wounded herself, with 2 rounds remaining in her weapon, single-handedly assaulted the Taliban position. She eliminated 7 enemy fighters, secured additional weapons and ammunition, and then carried Commander Cole, who had 2 bullets in his leg, 8 miles down the mountain to a secondary extraction point. 8 miles, Harrison repeated, disbelief evident in his voice, through enemy territory, while wounded, carrying a 220-pound man, plus her own gear, plus Cole's gear, in terrain that would challenge professional mountaineers in perfect conditions. Mitchell nodded slowly. It took her 8 hours. She didn't stop once. When the extraction helicopter arrived, she was still standing, still carrying Cole, still ready to fight if necessary. The room was completely silent. The official report says all 7 team members were killed in action. The 3 who actually died received posthumous medals in a classified ceremony. The 4 survivors were given new identities, new assignments, their old lives erased completely. Mitchell looked at Cole. Some of them retired, some of them disappeared into other classified programs. And one of them, apparently, has been spending the past few years taking down intelligence networks from the inside. That's what she was doing here? Harrison asked. Running a counterintelligence operation? She was hunting, Cole said quietly. That's what she does now. She finds people who threaten American service members, and she removes them from the equation. No official sanction, no bureaucratic oversight, no rules except the ones she sets for herself. That's not legal. No, Cole agreed. It's not, but it's effective. In the 6 years since she started this work, 17 separate networks have been dismantled. 32 foreign intelligence operatives have been identified and neutralized. An estimated 200 American lives have been saved. He paused. Sometimes the law isn't enough. Sometimes you need a ghost. Mitchell stood up. This conversation never happened. Staff Sergeant Brooks was never here. Mountain Ghost Unit doesn't exist and never did. If anyone asks, tonight was just a bar fight that got out of hand. But what about, Mason Briggs gestured helplessly. All of us saw, we know. You saw a skilled waitress who happened to know how to handle weapons. Unusual, but not unheard of. Plenty of military spouses pick up that kind of knowledge. Mitchell's voice was flat, final. That's the official story. That's what you'll tell anyone who asks. That's what you'll believe, eventually, when the memories start to fade and you begin to wonder if you imagined the whole thing. He headed for the door, his MPs following with Connor Walsh secured between them. One more thing, he said, pausing at the threshold. If any of you ever encounter Staff Sergeant Brooks again, you never saw her. You don't know her. She's a stranger who looks vaguely familiar, but you can't quite place. His eyes swept the room one final time. For her sake and for yours. The door closed behind him, leaving the remaining occupants of the Iron Horse to grapple with the reality of what they had witnessed and the impossibility of ever speaking about it. 3 hours later, the sun was beginning to lighten the eastern horizon when Hazel Brooks pulled her truck into the parking lot of a diner outside Olympia, the kind of place that catered to long-haul truckers and insomniacs, where the coffee was strong and the questions were non-existent. She chose a booth in the back, facing the door, her back to the wall. Old habits. The waitress who took her order was a heavy-set woman in her 50s, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Doris. She didn't comment on Hazel's torn shirt or the visible tattoo. She had seen stranger things in the pre-dawn hours. Just coffee, Hazel said. Black. Coming right up, honey. Hazel sat alone with her thoughts, watching the sky slowly brighten through the grease-smeared window. The adrenaline of the night was fading, replaced by the familiar emptiness that always followed a completed mission. She had done good work tonight. A dangerous network had been exposed. A handler had been captured. Intelligence that would save lives was already being analyzed by people whose job it was to act on such things. And yet, she thought about Mason Briggs and his desperate need to prove himself, about Raven Morrison and her casual cruelty, about all the people in that bar who had looked at her and seen nothing, just a small woman in a cheap shirt, not worth their attention or their respect. They weren't bad people, most of them, just blind, so convinced of their own importance that they couldn't see the truth standing right in front of them. That was the real enemy, Hazel realized, not the handlers and the networks and the foreign operatives. Those were just symptoms. The disease was arrogance, the certainty that the world worked the way you thought it did, that the people around you were exactly what they appeared to be, that strength and worth could be measured by obvious markers like size and volume and visible credentials. The coffee arrived, hot and bitter. Hazel wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Her phone buzzed. A text from Cole. Mitchell confirmed package received. Network roll-up in progress. Nice work. She typed back a simple acknowledgement and set the phone aside. Another buzz, this one from a different number, blocked, routed through servers that didn't officially exist. New assignment available. Timeline, immediate. Location, classified. Respond if interested. Hazel stared at the message for a long moment. She had been doing this work for 6 years now, moving from mission to mission, network to network, never staying in one place long enough to form connections. It was effective. It was necessary. It was also exhausting. But what was the alternative? Retirement? A normal life? She had tried that once, in the years immediately after Operation Fallen Eagle, had attempted to be a regular person with a regular job and regular relationships. It hadn't worked. The skills that made her exceptional at her job made her unsuitable for ordinary existence. She saw threats everywhere, calculated exits from every room, assessed every stranger as a potential enemy. Normal people didn't live like that, couldn't live like that. So, she had gone back to what she knew. Back to the shadows and the missions and the endless war against enemies who would never stop coming. She typed her response. Interested. Send details. The reply came within seconds. Briefing in 48 hours. Location to follow. Stay available. Hazel finished her coffee, left a $20 bill on the table, far more than the coffee cost, but Doris looked like she could use a good tip, and walked back out into the morning light. The sun was fully up now, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Beautiful, peaceful, a world that had no idea how close it came, on a regular basis, to falling apart. She climbed into her truck and sat for a moment, watching the sunrise. 48 hours. That was enough time to tie up loose ends, return to the Iron Horse, and collect her final paycheck. Say goodbye to Grace, who had been kind to her despite knowing nothing about who she really was. Maybe even stop by the base and check in on Ivy Patterson, the young soldier who had looked at her with such desperate hope. Ivy reminded Hazel of herself 16 years ago, young, eager, convinced that service meant something, that sacrifice had value, that the good guys won if they just tried hard enough. She hoped Ivy never lost that conviction, hoped the young woman would find a way to serve that didn't require giving up everything else, hoped she would be one of the lucky ones who made it through with their souls intact. But she knew the odds. Hazel started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot, heading back toward Lewis McCord. The road stretched out before her, endless and empty, leading toward a future she couldn't see but had stopped trying to predict. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else in her life. One step at a time, one mission at a time, one breath at a time. That was all anyone could do, really. Keep moving forward, keep fighting, keep believing that the work mattered, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. She was a ghost, a legend, a weapon shaped by forces beyond her control and wielded in conflicts most people would never know existed. But she was also Hazel Brooks, a small woman from a small town who had somehow become extraordinary, who had looked at the impossible and decided to do it anyway, who had carried men twice her size through mountains that should have killed them both, simply because giving up wasn't in her vocabulary. The highway unreeled beneath her wheels, the sun climbed higher, and somewhere behind her, in a bar that would never be quite the same, the people she had touched were beginning the long process of integrating the night's events into their understanding of reality. Some of them would succeed. They would carry the lesson forward, remember that appearances meant nothing, that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous, that strength came in forms they had never imagined. Others would fail. They would rationalize, minimize, convince themselves that what they had seen was exaggeration or illusion. They would go back to their assumptions and their prejudices, having learned nothing. That was human nature. You couldn't save everyone, couldn't change everyone, could only do your job, complete your mission, and hope that something good came out of the chaos. Hazel hoped. It was all she had left. The drive back to Lakewood took 45 minutes through morning traffic. She stopped at her apartment long enough to shower, change into clean clothes, and pack a bag for whatever came next. The space was sparse, functional, containing nothing that couldn't be abandoned at a moment's notice. No photographs, no mementos, no evidence that a real person lived there. By 9:30 a.m., she was walking into the Iron Horse for what she knew would be the last time. Grace Wheeler was already there, looking like she hadn't slept. The older woman's eyes widened when she saw Hazel, then filled with something that might have been tears. "You came back. I owe you a conversation, and probably an apology." "An apology?" Grace shook her head. "Honey, you don't owe me anything. I should be apologizing to you. The way my customers treated you, the things they said. They didn't know, that was the point." Grace studied her for a long moment. "No, I suppose they didn't. I suppose none of us did." She gestured to a booth. "Sit. Let me make you some breakfast." Hazel hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice. Thank you." They sat together in the empty bar, the morning light streaming through the windows that still bore the smudges of the previous night's chaos. Grace brought scrambled eggs and toast, simple fare, prepared with obvious care. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said. "You can ask. I might not be able to answer. Why here? Why this bar? This job? You could have been anywhere, done anything." Hazel considered the question. Because this is where the information was. Because someone was leaking sensitive details about military personnel, and the trail led here. Because, she paused, because I'm good at being invisible, and people talk more freely when they think no one important is listening. Grace nodded slowly. "And Connor, he was passing information to foreign intelligence operatives, names, schedules, personal details, the kind of information that gets people killed." Hazel's voice was flat. "He thought he was just making extra money. He didn't understand the consequences of what he was doing." "Will he?" Grace couldn't finish the question. "He'll face justice, military justice. It won't be pleasant, but it will be fair." Hazel took a bite of her eggs. "He has useful information. That will work in his favor. Cooperating witnesses usually get better deals than those who stay silent." Grace absorbed this. "And the man in the corner? The one who disappeared? Captured, also cooperating." Hazel allowed herself a small smile. It was a productive night. They sat in silence for a while, two women from different worlds sharing a moment of unexpected connection. Grace had built her life around serving others, creating a space where people could escape their troubles for a few hours. Hazel had built hers around hunting shadows, eliminating threats before they could materialize. Different paths, different purposes, but both, in their own way, were forms of service. The door opened, and Commander Cole walked in, followed by Noah Carter. Both men looked like they hadn't slept either, but there was an energy about them that suggested something important was happening. "Hazel," Cole said, "we need to talk." "I figured," she gestured to the booth. "Join us. Grace makes good eggs." Cole slid into the seat across from her, his expression serious. "The network you exposed last night was bigger than we thought. Much bigger. The handler you captured has been talking for hours, and every answer leads to more questions." "I know. That's usually how it works. This is different." Cole leaned forward. He named someone in the Pentagon, high level, someone with access to operational planning for half the special operations missions in the Pacific Theater. Hazel's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "Do we have confirmation?" "We're working on it, but if he's telling the truth..." Cole shook his head. "This could be the biggest counterintelligence breakthrough in a decade, or the biggest trap." "That too." He paused. "That's why I'm here. The people I work for, the ones who authorize operations like last night, they want to bring you in, not to debrief you, to recruit you, officially." Hazel raised an eyebrow. "I thought I already worked for them." "You work adjacent to them. Independent contractor, plausible deniability, all that." Cole's voice dropped. "They want to make you part of the permanent structure. Deputy director of a new counterintelligence task force. Unlimited budget, hand-picked team, authority to operate across all service branches. It was, Hazel realized, the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to take everything she had learned, everything she had done, and apply it at a scale that could actually make a lasting difference. It was also a cage, a gilded cage certainly, but a cage nonetheless. Bureaucracy, politics, the slow death of 1,000 committee meetings. "I'll think about it," she said. Cole nodded, unsurprised by her lack of enthusiasm. "I told them you'd say that. They're willing to wait, but not forever. The window closes in 30 days. Then they'll have my answer in 30 days. Noah Carter spoke up for the first time. "Whatever you decide, you should know that what you did last night changed things. Not just the mission, but the people. I talked to Harrison this morning. He's a different man, questioning assumptions he's never questioned before, thinking about leadership in ways he never considered. And Mason Briggs submitted a request for psychological evaluation, voluntary, said he needs to understand why he became the kind of person who mocks strangers for entertainment." Noah paused. "That's not nothing, Hazel. That's growth. You did that." Hazel looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't do anything except show up and do my job." "Sometimes that's enough." Grace Wheeler's voice was quiet but firm. "Sometimes just being who you are, in the right place at the right time, is all it takes to change the world." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. Hazel finished her breakfast and pushed back from the table. "I should go. I have a briefing in 48 hours, and I need to prepare." "The new assignment?" Cole asked. "Apparently so." She stood, looking down at the three people who had become, in their different ways, something like friends. "Thank you, all of you, for understanding, for not asking too many questions, for just being there." Grace smiled. "You're welcome here any time, honey. Whenever you need a place to disappear for a while. Whenever you need someone to make you breakfast and not ask why you look like you haven't slept in a week." "I'll remember that." Hazel walked toward the door, then paused. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, different from the one Cole had given Ivy, older and more worn, bearing an insignia that no one in this room except her would recognize. She set it on the bar. "Give this to Ivy Patterson. Tell her it belonged to someone who believed in her before she believed in herself. Tell her," Hazel's voice caught slightly, "tell her to become the person she wants to be, not the person other people expect her to be." She walked out before anyone could respond, letting the door swing shut behind her. The Washington morning was bright and clear, the sky a deep blue that seemed to stretch forever. Hazel stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the sun on her face. 30 days to decide her future, 48 hours until her next mission, a lifetime of questions that might never be answered. She climbed into her truck and started the engine. The road stretched out before her, endless possibilities branching from every intersection. Her phone buzzed. The briefing location had arrived, a city she had never visited, a target she had never heard of, a mission that would probably be impossible. She smiled. "Just another day," she murmured to herself, and drove toward whatever came next. In the Iron Horse, Grace Wheeler picked up the challenge coin and examined it in the morning light. The insignia showed a mountain peak surrounded by 7 stars, with Latin words inscribed around the edge. "What does it say?" Noah Carter asked. Grace squinted at the tiny letters. "Ex umbris Victoria," something like that. "From the shadows, victory," Cole translated quietly. His voice was heavy with something that might have been pride, might have been sorrow, might have been both. That was their motto, Mountain Ghost Unit, the operators who came from nowhere and disappeared back into nothing. He looked at the door through which Hazel had vanished. That's who she is. That's who she'll always be. A ghost, a legend, a story that people will tell in whispers for generations. Grace carefully placed the coin in her pocket. "Then I'll make sure Ivy gets this, and I'll make sure she understands what it means." "What does it mean?" Noah asked. Grace smiled, a sad and knowing expression that spoke of wisdom earned through years of watching people struggle and grow, and sometimes become more than they ever imagined possible. "It means that sometimes the smallest person in the room is the strongest. It means that appearances are meaningless. It means that the people who change the world are rarely the ones who seek recognition for it." She began collecting the breakfast dishes, her movements slow and thoughtful. "It means that somewhere out there, right now, a woman most people would overlook without a second glance is standing between us and dangers we'll never know existed." Cole nodded. That's exactly what it means. Outside in a truck headed toward an uncertain future, Hazel Brooks allowed herself one final thought about the night that had changed everything and nothing. She had been underestimated, mocked, dismissed as insignificant. And then she had shown them exactly how wrong they were. Not for recognition, not for revenge, not even for the satisfaction of watching their assumptions crumble. She had done it because it was necessary, because the mission required it, because somewhere in the darkness there were always more enemies, more threats, more reasons to keep fighting. That was her truth, her purpose, her reason for existing. From the shadows, victory, always. The highway stretched on, mile after endless mile, leading toward tomorrow. And Hazel Brooks drove into the light, ready for whatever came next, because the mission never ended, it only changed form. And she would be there, as she had always been, standing in the gap between safety and chaos, doing the work that others couldn't or wouldn't do. A small woman, a quiet woman, a woman most people would never notice, the most dangerous kind of all. Miles away, in a secure facility that appeared on no maps, the handler Hazel had captured was still talking. Names, locations, methods. The architecture of a conspiracy that had been building for years, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone patient enough to unravel it. And unraveling it was. Thread by thread, name by name, secret by secret. The work continued. Somewhere, in an office with no windows, someone was reading the intelligence that Hazel's mission had generated, making decisions, authorizing operations, setting in motion a chain of events that would ripple across continents. They never knew her name, never saw her face, never understood that the information they were acting on had been obtained by a woman who looked like she should be serving coffee, not dismantling international espionage networks. That was fine. Recognition was not the point. The point was the work, the mission, the endless, necessary, thankless labor of keeping the world from falling apart. Hazel Brooks understood that better than anyone, and she would keep doing it, keep fighting, keep sacrificing, until the day came when she couldn't anymore. Then someone else would take up the burden, someone young and eager, like Ivy Patterson, who would receive a challenge coin and a story about a woman who came from nowhere and did impossible things. Someone who would learn that strength wasn't about size or volume or visible credentials. It was about will, determination, the refusal to give up no matter how impossible the odds. That was the legacy of Mountain Ghost Unit. That was the truth Hazel Brooks carried with her. From the shadows, victory, now, tomorrow, forever. The road stretched on, and the mission continued.